Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We're here to talk about Sincgars Radio, the voice of the battlefield. This is for informational purpose. Imagine yourself on the battlefield and you're 30 miles away from safety, and the only communication you have is a radio. Back about 20 or 30 years ago, you wouldn't be able to communicate with anyone. Now, with Sincgars radios, the ability to communicate can be 10 to 40 kilometers on a perfect day. That's about 25 miles on a perfect day. If you're in a high pressure situation and you can't communicate with someone and travel throughout the battlefield, of course, that's a pressure situation and people could lose their lives. To understand about Sincgars radios, you can communicate from one person to the next person. The generation nowadays have cell phones and other means of communication, whereas having a Sincgars radio, you can communicate with each other and other people can't eavesdrop on you, or you don't have anyone ear hustling. Sincgars radios is the backbone of communication for the military. Why was Sincgars radio developed? They were developed because we had too many enemies able to listen in on our communication. Now you can capture a radio if you don't have the appropriate cryptographic information within that radio. You are here static. You won't hear anyone speaking, and it works pretty good. It's a lot of information I could put out, but legally I can't put out. Our radios are built for anti-jamming. You can't jam the radio, even if you tried. It would take half the satellites in the sky to jam a Sincgars radio. I would love to go in more details about that, but I can't. The vulnerabilities of it, there are no vulnerabilities of the radio. It doesn't have any static interference, and it's a pretty reliable radio. I've spoken to someone over 60 miles with a radio. And being in the military, I had a lot of opportunities to use this radio on several different types of terrain, mountain tops, the desert, as well as the jungle, and a couple other places I don't care to speak about. The communication gap between the 90s and 2005, we had what we call the AM radio. It works great at night. It used amplitude and multitude. And what we use now is called FM, frequency modulation. With frequency modulation, it uses an omnidirectional antenna, which the signal goes out in multiple different directions. Sort of like a cell phone, because depending on where you're at, you may communicate from a tower that's 30 miles away from where you're communicating from. So far, do we have any questions?
How much does one of the units run about?
The average Sincgars radio will cost you roughly the last model that I have the pricing on. It would cost you around about $3,500 per radio. They're about the size of two bricks put together, just a standard brick that goes on a normal home. But the radio is about the size of that. You can also use that radio in multiple different types of vehicles, NRAMs, Humvees, Jeeps, commercial vehicles. And you can also take the radio and place it on your back with a BA 5590 battery, which will last about 8 hours, and you can travel, or you can hike or foot march, whichever phrase you prefer to use. And you can communicate up to 15 miles in a man pack configuration, where you just have an antenna that's about the length of the average person's arm, but you can communicate up to 15 miles. Now, if you're on top of a mountain top that has an elevation of 8,000 feet, you probably can reach about 30 to 50 miles with just that manpack radio. Um, what we use with that manpack radio, we're supposed to be able to give you what we call the Zulu time, the calendar date, and yeah, the Zulu time and the calendar date, and give you the cryptographic information. And no matter where you're at in the world, You're supposed to be able to load that radio up with that cryptographic information and put the calendar date and the Zulu time in that radio and reach out and call whomever because we're all on the same standards, if that makes sense to you.
So
So Sincgars
are
radio
these
is,
available to the general public?
no, they're not.
Okay.
Um, they're more appropriate for the military and tactical situations, because depending on what you may be talking about rescuing a soldier or some POWs. So you don't want the general population to be able to access that information. Even if they had the radio, they would not be able to access it because they don't have the cryptographic information. Now, this radio also has the ability to tune to any TV station that's free, not cable. And you can tune the radio to any radio station. However, when you use a certain frequencies for the radio, you can interfere with the airplanes, the what is it called, flight control. You can interfere with that. You can interfere with the police force or any first responders. You can interfere with all that just because it's pushing out a signal that's so large and the frequency range it hops 100 times per second. And you can just imagine somebody trying to tune that one single frequency. It's just not going to happen. And if you're out of sync for whatever reason, I can pull you into sync if I have the master radio, if that makes sense to you. It can be broken down to many different details. However, some of the things I can't talk about just because of military purposes. I don't want to get myself in trouble. Now, this particular course I used to teach for about 3.5 years. I taught for 17 days. I would teach 32 different students for 17 days. And by the time they left my class, they could name the radio, they could name all the components that go with the radio, and they could operate the radio from a cold start to a hot start. Cold start, meaning you're starting with just the minimum basics, and I got to pull you in. Hot start, I'm giving you the cryptographic information. I'm giving you the Julian date and the calendar date, and you load all that into the radio, and you do a radio check with me, which is nothing more than making a test phone call. But in military terms, it's just a radio check. And the radio has saved several people's lives over the years. Uh, and that's it's pretty much a phenomenal radio, and it's informational for young people who may or may not want to join the military and go into the communication field. As we all know, the communication field is a broad arena to play in. I was lucky enough for the first 3 years of my career to deal with first 3 to 5 years to deal with nothing but the tactical side of the house. And the powers that be blessed me to say, "Hey, you're going to go work on computers." And I hated it when they told me I had to do that. But however, once you learn those skills, and it's all about repetition, you're going to do it multiple times in the army. So because you train to fight. So when you sitting in front of and you got 50 people that need to be rescued, and you got some general officer breathing down your neck saying, "Hey, we need to get the communication up so we can reach out and let these guys know we're coming from the north. We're going to pop blue smoke. We'll be in a we'll be either on foot, on in air. It just depends on how you're going to retrieve those personnel. So that can vary, but those are all code words. Yes, what's your question, Sherry?
Yes. So, how was it a common or uncommon for these devices to malfunction? How reliable were they, General?
Very reliable as long as you have power. Now, if you hooked up to a vehicle, uh, you had to keep the vehicle. You'd have to run the vehicle probably every 30 minutes for about 15 minutes because they pull a lot of power. If you're in a fixed position, you'd have a generator hooked up to them. Only time they would fail is when they lose power or somebody didn't change the cryptographic information, because you don't keep the same cryptographic information for the duration of whatever mission you're on. You're going to change that multiple day every several days you're going to change it. I'm not going to tell you how many, but every several days you're going to change that information just in case. For instance, Solomon got captured and he had that cryptographic information. Immediately, we're going to change the cryptographic information across the peninsula. That military wide, we're going to change that just because Solomon got captured. We might have got him back. Hopefully, we got him back. So as long as we get him back, that's great. But we're still going to change that information because we don't know if he lost anything or if it was compromised. So, but the failure ratio, using them in Iraq and Kuwait, the temperature can sometimes get up to 130, 140 degrees, and the radio still function properly.
Thank you.
It does the same in cold weather as long as you have power going to the radio. For example, when I was teaching the course at Fort Gordon, I had an instructor tell one of the students that it was too hot in Georgia for the radio to work. And of course, I didn't tell the student that the instructor didn't know what he was talking about. I told the students, I said, well, we're using this radio in Iraq currently. This is the temperature in Iraq today, and the radios are working fine. So now you have your answer if it's too hot or not for the radios. So that's just several things that you learn about the radio over the years. Um, in conclusion, if we don't have any additional questions, outstanding. Sincgars radios were created to solve a problem because the old AM radios, the old ASIP radios were known to fail. And so, one thing you can't do on the battlefield or on any tactical mission, if you can't communicate with the next person, you're dead in the water. Because if you can't communicate, you can't move forward in the fight. If you need to go rescue somebody and you need assistance, you can't call anyone. So, it's very important to be able to communicate when you're across the battlefield because it could be something as simple as you need water. That's one of the things we humans have to use to survive. So it could be something we call it class 8, which is nothing but food. I think class 3 is fuel. You might need some fuel for your vehicles or your generator, or you might need medical supplies. I think that's, if I'm remembering correctly, that's class 4. So if you can't call anybody and tell them what you need, you can't receive any of those items that you need. And there's no such thing doing a smoke signal or waving a flag, even though we used to communicate like that to get those items. Because you could be 10 miles away, but if don't nobody know you need it, it's like you're 1,000 miles away, if that makes sense to you. And still today, Sincgars radios are still being used across the battlefield. Even though I have individuals that stated that prior to me going to Iraq as a service member that we wasn't using Sincgars radios in theater. In theater is nothing but the battlefield. However, once I landed, which I already knew because I had friends that were downrange, once I landed over there and got associated with my personnel over there, there were Sincgars radios all over the camp. That's how we communicated internally. Now, when we went 60 or 70 miles out, of course, we couldn't communicate, but we used the satellites to communicate at that point. This doctrine is coming from 2022 of sitcom, and it's if you want to get more familiar with it, there's a lot of research out there about it, and you just do a Google search for Sincgars radio or ASIP radios or technical radios for the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marine. It doesn't really matter because we all use the same thing. Excuse me, we just use it in a different manner. So, in conclusion, Sincgars solved a great problem for the military. The key features of the Sincgars radio is frequency hopping. You guys heard me mention the radio hops 100 times per second. It's called frequency hopping. So you take a 5-digit frequency and it hops to a different frequency 100 times per second. You won't see it with the naked eye, but it does it. A long-term impact, it made the The Army, especially the Army, I can't speak for the other branches, it made the communication a lot more easier. And the radio is very user friendly, so it's easy to learn.